Welcome to the Rugged Human Podcast, where we explore the many facets of growth, mindset, spirituality, business, and entrepreneurship, all while finding our own unique life balance. I'm your host, Jared Foos, an entrepreneur, people connector, and general applier of common sense. Welcome to the Rugged Human Podcast. My name is Jared Foos. I'll be your host. Thanks for tuning in. And with me, my guest today is a gentleman that I've had a number of fantastic conversations with. He is a retired nurse. He is a Vietnam vet. He is a philosophical Buddhist. And that's about all I can really say about him. At this point, I'm going to introduce you. Thank you, Carl, for being here. And to start, why don't you tell me a little bit about your upbringing, when you kind of came in? Because one of the things we did talk about is you grew up with a very unique set of circumstances, I would think.
Very unique.
Very unique. So why don't you tell me a little bit about you in that regard?
Okay. I was born in 1947 in Southern California to parents who became Zen Buddhists when I was about 10 years of age, maybe a little bit younger than that. Okay. After doing, they started off as, actually my father thought about joining the seminary when he was in high school and then became disenchanted with Christianity, and both my parents were pretty atheistic until they felt like something was missing in their lives, so they took some comparative religion courses at UCLA. Okay. And chose Zen Buddhism very methodically as the thing that seemed to satisfy their needs the most. And I adopted that Buddhist perspective, if not the religion, at least the Buddhist perspective on life through being raised in that.
Excellent. Okay. So that is where Carl kind of starts his world. So at that point, tell me, you were in Southern California, right?
Yeah.
And then what happened at that point? What time was it? What time?
I graduated from high school in 1965. Okay. Went to a junior college with the intention of it being basically grade 13 and not being very serious about it.
Yeah.
I was a poor student and was going to get drafted, and decided that I didn't want to wind up in the bush in Vietnam, so I figured I'd choose a little bit easier course. No one informed me that the Marine Corps didn't have their own medical personnel, but used Navy personnel, and after a year and a half in the Navy, I got transferred over to the Marine Corps and wound up in Vietnam in the bush anyway.
Okay. So, Vietnam. What was Vietnam like?
Vietnam was good place to observe human behavior, and not in a positive way, but certainly taught you a lot of things about humanity. And one of them is that hatred is contagious, and that you need to dehumanize your enemy in order to fight them. And I was very concerned that that was happening to me. So I was actually very grateful when I got medevac due to cellulitis from leech bites.
Okay. So you were in the terrain, had leeches all over you.
Yeah, and
you got some kind of
But I got cellulitis from it.
What is cellulitis? I actually don't know.
A soft tissue infection. I wound up in a hospital bed for the better part of a month.
Okay.
As a result of that.
Okay, so they took you out of Vietnam because of the cellulitis.
But again, I never thought that I was going to get killed in Vietnam. What I was afraid of was I was going to get dehumanized.
So you had mentioned before in one of our previous conversations, you told me a story about this particular thing, and then you said that you were driving through some villages.
Oh yeah, on convoy going through the villages up in the DMZ, and fellow Marines would be taking cans of sea ration and throwing them at the children, not with the intention of feeding them, but the intention of hitting them in the head with their sea ration.
And this is the example of...
And it's just an example of what war does to people, the mentality that's arguably necessary in order to go out and kill a fellow human being.
Yeah. Ultimately to dehumanize, as
To
you said.
dehumanize, sure.
Right.
That's why we use such words as calling them animals and all sorts of derogatory names in order to facilitate your ability to wreak havoc on.
Now, do you think this is something? I mean, is this something that they, as a soldier, as somebody being forced, probably in a lot of situations? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people signed up as.
Oh, you always have a choice. You could go to jail, or you could go to Canada,
or you could join the military. When you get into that situation, is it almost a coping mechanism that you have to force yourself to dehumanize them so that you can actually do what you have to do on a day-to-day basis without dying, getting killed, getting thrown in jail, getting some...
Or your conscience bothering you.
Right. So this is what we talked about as well. So you essentially were put into a catch-22 situation.
Right.
Where your philosophy and your moral compass was anti, and this is not new. A lot of people say the same things about being in war and being in really negative situations where they have to do something they don't want to do necessarily that goes against their grain. How did you walk out of that? Because you say you were grateful for that experience.
Grateful, but I also feel, to this day, I feel guilt over it. People say, you were a hospital corpsman, you weren't killing people, you were patching people up. Well, you don't fight a war without medics.
Right.
And you patch people up so they can go out and kill some more people.
Right.
So yeah, it doesn't vindicate you just because you weren't pulling the trigger.
Right. Understood. So at that point then, you're now out of Vietnam. What does Carl do at that point?
Carl at that point is after
I don't know why I put it in the third person. You sit right here, but
my first duty station was Oakland, California,
okay.
And I spent almost all of my spare time in San Francisco in 1968, 69, up in the Haight-Ashbury district. And
tell me that story. Tell me the Timothy Leary. Is there that? What was his phrase? Tune in, tune out,
or drop. Yeah,
I can't remember. I don't know it. I wasn't there, but. You were.
Yeah, I was very fascinated by the drug culture and
sure.
Started smoking pot very shortly after I got to San Francisco.
No pot smoking in Vietnam?
No. I got drunk the first night I was in Vietnam, and we got mortared in the base camp, and I was stumbling through the dark, tripping over guide wires, and wound up falling into a ditch for the entire barrage. And swore I would never do anything that would compromise my ability to respond while I was in Vietnam.
Wow.
So I did nothing. I didn't drink in Vietnam. I didn't smoke in Vietnam.
Probably a very wise decision. Okay. But okay.
So,
all right. So Haight-Ashbury.
But I got very involved with the anti-war movement even when I was in the military. Sure. As a matter of fact, I was one of those people they didn't ask to stay. I wasn't. Yeah. I got an honorable discharge, but I started participating in a lot of anti-war activity while I was in the military, and that wasn't appreciated.
Okay. All right, just making sure that it looks like we're still recording over there.
Okay.
I'm just going to walk over there and look just to be safe. And still... What is it doing? I don't have my glasses on. Let me just... Does this say... Oh, it says 9 minutes. Great. Okay, good. We can delete this part out. But, okay, so you are in Haight-Ashbury. It is 1969.
Yeah.
I'm 1 year old. So that gives me some perspective on where that was at. You're experimenting with the drug culture, what's going on around you, and you have now this perspective. Is your perspective shifting by taking drugs, hallucinogens, or any of that based upon what you went through with the war, based upon your Buddhist philosophy that came from your parents ultimately?
Yeah. I became very interested in becoming self-sustaining, not from a malicious standpoint like I hear about people in Montana, digging bunkers and things of that sort,
Right.
but just being able to grow my own food and learn how to take care of myself, take responsibility for it.
Okay.
And as a result of that, I wound up moving from Southern California to rural Virginia and bought 12 acres of land and
Okay.
build a log cabin by cutting down the trees and skinning the logs and taking the sand and stone off the river bottom and making cement columns and whatnot, and growing my own food and raising dairy goats and a large organic garden and things of this sort.
And this time, you're at this point you are a nurse. As a career.
Working, I'm working as a nurse in an emergency room in Bedford, Virginia.
At the same time as you are self-sustaining, living off the land in a log cabin that you built.
Right.
From what's around you, you're raising your own livestock.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, no electricity, water. What?
No electricity. No. I had a spring.
Okay.
And I had a.
I mean, you
55,
really.
Yeah, I had a 55-gallon oil drum on top of the house that had gravity feed, and I used to fill that from the spring with a battery-operated pump that would pump water from the spring up into the barrel, and then I'd live on 55 gallons of water would last a week.
Okay.
And that's with eventually with 2 children and a wife.
Okay.
And washing clothes and all of that stuff. But,
Pretty good use of water.
Yeah, but I felt very strongly.
People take 55-gallon showers in an hour these days.
I was convinced then, and I'm convinced again, that we're going to lose the comforts of home that we're used to, and that people that will do well are the people that know how to take care of themselves.
Okay. So that's kind of a survivalistic perspective at that point?
But not a defensive or hostile.
Yeah.
Just
prepared.
Yeah.
You had made a comment in one of our previous conversations, and it's funny because we actually recorded a previous version of this, but the dang thing didn't record. So, caveat to this. But one thing you mentioned I wanted to circle back on that I thought was quite interesting was the fact that in your profession as a nurse, you were taking care of some pretty indigent people, pretty people that were poverty-stricken, living in, I would assume, somewhere in Virginia.
In a ghetto area in town. Yeah.
In tough places to live. And you had talked about, well, why don't you tell me what your point was?
Well,
it was very poignant. I got a lot out of it, and I loved where you went with talking about perspective.
Okay, I was working in an emergency room and get off work at 11 o'clock in the evening and driving down through the ghetto district to get to the rural area that I lived in outside of town. Mm-hmm. And where it's driving through the area where the people lived that I'd been taking care of for the previous 8 or 12 hours that I was in the emergency room. And most of them seemed to be, I can't say the word resentful of their environment, but they were people that begrudged their lack of the better things in life, and seemed to have a strong yearning for that, and didn't seem to be particularly happy people in that perspective. I, on the other hand, was going to a much more primitive environment, no running water, no electricity, and looking forward to it. And the difference was, one, that I chose it versus a lot of the people that I was driving past did not choose did not have the choice that I had. I won't say they didn't choose it, but they didn't have the choices that I had. They didn't have the opportunities that I had. But I felt much more eager and happy going to my location than I felt those people experienced in their lives. And then the difference was strictly a matter of, one, I chose it, and that I chose it. That it wasn't. I didn't feel victimized by my environment. I felt in control of my.
Yeah, and what I get from that is that, I mean, you're literally going from a hospital setting with, first world technology to a homestead with third world technology. You're essentially going back in time to the third world, Middle Ages, whatever, and looking forward to it. And that somebody else going from their own place, wherever it might be, to their house with running water, with electricity, with probably big screen TVs, being resentful of it. And I get the circumstance. I get the matter of choice. Some people can choose where they grow up versus some people cannot. However, I think it's still a bigger picture that the perspective
it's a matter of
changes everything.
Perspective changes everything.
And I love the Wayne Dyer phrase that says, when you change the way you look at things, the things that you look at change.
Absolutely.
Right? So, and that's a great example of it right there. And that's fantastic. So you're living off the land. You're a nurse. You're giving back. You're helping people. You've got a relatively healthy perspective on the way you are living. You've got the history of the Vietnam and the horror that you've seen there and went through. You've got an anti-war movement. What happens now in your life? Where did you go from there?
Oh, I got divorced from my first wife,
Okay.
who was, by the way, an extremely self-sufficient person.
Mm-hmm.
She left home at age.
Was that divorce because of the living in third world conditions? And
Oh, no. She was. I came from a city environment and admired her. The thing I admired most about her was her abilities.
Okay.
She could build a house, wire a house, make goat cheese, raise animals. She knew all those. She left home at 15 and I lived in a commune.
Okay.
So
do we want to hear about the commune?
Before I didn't know her during that time. But my point is that she knew how to do all the things that I didn't know how to do, moving from the city to the country, and so I admired that and ignored the fact that she knew how to do those things because she didn't trust anybody else. So her attitude was to strike first.
Okay. So there's an interpersonal. You ended up getting divorced. It wasn't because of the circumstances per se. It was just interpersonal. No,
she was perfectly happy in that environment.
You guys, okay. So you guys you moved. You went your separate ways. It didn't work together.
Right.
And then where did you go from there? We were talking about passions, I think. At one point,
I became much more involved in woodworking because I had the ability and the time. Once I moved back into the city environment, I bought a house and set up a woodworking shop in the basement of that.
Okay.
And started dedicating my interest to woodworking, to hand woodworking.
Mm-hmm. So we talked a little bit about perspective and shifting perspective, because that lines up with a lot of the things that I talk about in Rugged Human. And now we're kind of moving into the world of passion. And because you made a choice, you left, the relationship ended, you moved out of rural third world living, you moved into the city with the intention of starting a wood shop because you wanted to focus. But
there's also a lot of partying going on.
Okay.
It wasn't. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so there's that, and then so now you're passionate about woodworking. You're still working as an RN.
Right.
And then our conversation before, which I kind of want to bring this back around well, is your perspective on life, from what I've gathered so far, is extremely positive, right? But when we've gotten into deeper conversations, you've seen the dark side of humanity. You lived through it with Vietnam. And you have a general take on overall humanity. Tell me about why you don't think our human race is going to last.
Okay, and your screen just went dark. I don't know whether that means anything or not.
I don't either, but I think it's still recording. Let's just double check. Let's double check that. And it's still going.
Okay, so we're talking about my perspective on humanity and my perspective on personal view of life.
Yeah.
Okay. My perspective on humanity is that we're not going to make it.
Okay.
And I don't feel that that's a iffy type of thing. I think that's a certain type of thing that we're not.
Mm-hmm.
No species has ever survived forever. I mean, all species eventually go extinct, and ours will also. And I think we're headed like a freight train towards it right now.
Mm-hmm.
And you could get very despondent over that. I'm not despondent over it because I don't focus my attention on that. I focus my attention on what can be done in front of me
Mm-hmm.
to make life better for humanity around me, to care about other people that I can affect now and not focus on things that I can't change.
Okay.
We talked earlier about the serenity prayer, and the most important part of that is the wisdom to know the difference between the things you can change and the things you can't. I can't change the ultimate course of humanity.
Right.
But I can change the course of interaction between myself and those around me,
Right.
and between myself and my environment. And ultimately, it doesn't change the net result in the end, but it certainly can affect the amount of suffering in the interim. And
Okay.
that's where my obligation is
Mm-hmm.
to relieve the suffering that is right around me.
I love that, because let me just get what I think I just got out of it was humanity is pretty much doomed based upon the fact that we are already, I don't know what that beep is. What is this? Hold on. Hey. No, we're in the middle of it. This is going to be on film.
This is recording number 2.
Recording number 2. I didn't hit record the first time, evidently. We did a whole interview and didn't record. No. Yep. What do you need, baby? Okay. Let's see if that did anything to the recording. If that's still going. I'm glad we can edit. 22 minutes and counting. Sweet.
Okay.
All right. So let's to basically what that did. The perspective shift is what I wanted to talk about. Was that you have a very dim view of humanity, and you don't think that it's like the Titanic. You think it's too late to change the trajectory of that ship.
Yeah, you
Government
have too many
can't do
people,
it.
and each
People
one is
can't do it.
consuming too much.
Technology can't do it. It's already going there. We can't stop.
Right.
But at the same time, to juxtapose against that, most people would have a very depressed, negative view of things on life in general, yet you have a very positive perspective, and your explanation for that is the fact that you live more in the now, more thinking based upon what good you can do for those around you in your immediate, what you can change versus what you cannot change. And that's irregardless of what you think the big picture is going to be for humanity.
Back a century or more ago, maybe several centuries, I'm not really sure, the Anasazi Indians were living in an area in the Southwest that was being depleted of the resources necessary for them to survive. And that culture was pretty much doomed because of it.
Mm-hmm.
If you were a person living in that environment and you were aware that that was what was happening, and that the environment was changing, and you couldn't do anything about that, you'd have a choice. You could either be very depressed about it, or you could live a productive life, caring about the things around you, caring about the other people, and easing their suffering and your own suffering,
Mm-hmm.
which is the rational approach. You know, which kind of life do you want to live? I'm not saying be oblivious to the ultimate end of it, but to concentrate on something you can't change is a waste of your energy.
Okay. So one of the things that we talked about before, which I thought was a fantastic point, was tell me your perspective on why you choose to live trying to be more of service, I think were your words, or being helpful to those around you, Because ultimately, you said it wasn't altruistic and sounded almost selfish.
It is almost selfish. Sure, I want to live in a safe,
so tell me about
loving environment, and the only way I can have that kind of environment is being that kind of a person. If I look for my reward in heaven somewhere down the line, that may or may not happen. And it should, whether there's an ultimate reward in the end should be irrelevant.
Right.
What matters is right now, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. One of my favorite arguments I will say to people that I don't believe in God, and they will say, well, you're going to find out, and then you're going to be sorry. My wife is a Christian, and she says, what are you going to do when she gets raptured? And I say, I'm going to change my mind because obviously I was wrong. And I will tell people that story, and they say, well, it'll be too late. And my response is, no, it won't be too late, because what I'm looking for is not a reward at the end. What I'm looking for is the truth. And if the truth is there's a God, okay, then there's a God. Whether it's to my benefit or not has absolutely nothing to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one has to have the ability to take your own personal interest out of things in order to look at things objectively.
Certainly.
And see the truth in things.
Certainly.
As long as I put my bias in there, as long as I look at life as how I want it to be, not the way I observe it to be, then I'm living in an illusion.
Certainly. It sounds like you're talking about expectations.
Yeah.
Which tend to be never come true. So, but if you choose to shift your perspective to more realistic living in the now, not creating landmines to live by or negative things by helping other people, that's kind of where I wanted to go. Because by living, and you say it's not altruistic and it's ultimately selfish, but ultimately selfishness, you can't give away, you can't help another person if you don't have anything in the tank to give, if you don't have a skill set, if you don't have knowledge to share, if you don't have kindness or compassion to give to another person. If you don't have that, and if you don't develop that within yourself, then you're not any good to anybody else. You can't live that life, right? So you kind of have to develop yourself in order to give that part of yourself away to help other people, so you don't leave behind this stuff that you have to always look back on.
Yeah. It's a matter
of live a more simple, happier, easier life.
Observe the results of your behavior and evaluate whether it was beneficial or detrimental.
Yes, this was the point. I love this point. So you live your life realistically, not saying, hey, I want to be this fantastic, great person, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
you basically live your life saying, if I live such and such a way, I observe the result of what happens.
Yeah, do I like those results or not? And I don't like the results of being self-centered and putting me first. That leads me to an unhappy result.
Okay. I love that perspective. The way you summarize that's very, very, very specific, but it makes that's the big argument there. When you live a more giving, helpful, service-filled life, less egotistical, less thinking about me and more thinking about others, life is just easier.
Yeah, you don't need a book or a God or anybody else to tell you what is appropriate behavior. I always wonder why people think they need some kind of an external moral groundwork. You don't need. It's built in. It's built into the results of your behavior.
So it's basically a feedback loop.
Absolutely.
But here's the thing that I would have to argue would be a lot of people are not observant enough to see the relevant feedback.
Because they don't understand that everything's connected to everything else.
Well, there you go. There's a whole lot of big pictures. I think you take some philosophy, some world experience, some life experience with you to come to these certain things. So given that, what would you, if you were talking to somebody younger, because there's probably going to be a few people out here a lot younger than us talking about this, what is a lesson that somebody could actually take from what you just described?
That business of everything's related to everything else. And if you truly understood that your behavior ripples on and interacts with everything ad infinitum.
Okay. The butterfly effect, for lack of a better word.
That you would change your behavior. I always wondered why if when people talk about God and they say, well, people are naturally, no, you've got free will. And it's true, you do have free will. And they say, well, God gave you free will. How can I say this? You're gonna have to edit this part out because I need a moment. I need a moment to compose myself.
Take your time.
My mind's kind of blank right now.
Anyway, you were basically saying the argument is free will versus that.
Yeah, that if God had the ability to give you free will, He also had the ability and didn't use it to give you the innate, inherent understanding that everything is related to everything else. And if you did that, if that was an inherent characteristic of a human being, human behavior would change dramatically.
Okay, so the argument is that that understanding, and this is kind of goes back to the question I wanted to throw out there, and the life experience kind of thing. That's not an innate thing.
But if I was God, it would have been an innate thing.
Right.
You know,
but
because
see, if people innately understood that, if that was an instinct,
you could still choose to do bad things.
Right.
It wouldn't keep you from doing. You just understand the consequences of doing negative behavior. Sure. But people think that their behavior is somehow independent of all these other things, and it's causative of all these other things.
So I guess let's we're kind of coming up on the half hour, 35, 40 minute range in here. So let's kind of summarize here. So thank you for being here. One of the things I think we can all take out of this is that regardless of your ultimate idea of where you think life is going or what you think, living to a passion and to a purpose on that journey and being more in the now and helping others in the direct vicinity that you can actually use, you know, and shifting and changing your own perspective to make your life happier, it becomes easier to live, just generally to live, because you're not leaving like landmines behind you. You're not leaving negativity behind you. So you're not always looking back over your shoulder saying, who's that person I wronged before? But you're looking forward to this. So ultimately, having that positive perspective and understanding that all things are interconnected is the general understanding that you can move forward in an easier way and a more balanced way through life.
You're going with the flow. You're not swimming upstream.
You're not swimming upstream if you're inherently trying to live by a set of principles that is defined by a feedback loop.
Exactly.
In your environment, that when you do the wrong things, you get negative feedback and it becomes harder to move forward.
Exactly.
And you'll end up swimming against the current, as you just said. And ultimately you learn that by living a more service, less individual, egotistical kind of way, it becomes easier.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, I think we can leave it at that.
All right.
Carl, thank you, sir.
You're welcome. All right.
I appreciate it.
I don't know whether that's better than the first recording or not.
I think it'll be just fine. Thanks for tuning in to the Rugged Human Podcast. If you guys are watching on YouTube or on the video version of this, please subscribe, like, and, pass this on. Share this with somebody who may have needed to hear some of the stuff that Carl just told us and shared with us. And, if you're interested in more of this kind of thing, Rugged Human is coming out with a couple of courses that are going to be probably coming out late July this month, and we're building them out right now, that are very focused on how to shift your life into this kind of a thinking to make it easier to move forward through life. So if you're interested in more information on that, please check out ruggedhuman.com. And otherwise, thanks a lot for being here. You guys have a great day.
There you go. All right.